Olof Palme, the Prime Minister murdered on an ordinary street with no bodyguard. He was one of Europe's most recognizable political leaders, and he was walking home from the movies with his wife on a normal Friday night, with no security detail at all. A single gunman approached from behind, fired twice, and disappeared into the dark. Nearly 40 years later, despite one of the largest criminal investigations in Swedish history, the case has been formally closed without a definitively proven killer. Olof Palme served as Prime Minister of Sweden for much of the 1970s and 1980s, becoming one of Scandinavia's most internationally recognized and, in certain respects, genuinely controversial political figures, known for his outspoken, frequently blunt criticism of both American foreign policy, including his direct public condemnation of the Vietnam War, and apartheid-era South Africa, positions that earned him considerable international attention and, according to some subsequent investigative theories, potentially significant enemies well beyond Sweden's own domestic political landscape. What made Palme's specific approach to personal security genuinely, notably unusual for a sitting head of government, particularly one with such a prominent, sometimes deliberately provocative international political profile, was his consistent personal preference for moving through Stockholm with minimal or, on many occasions, entirely absent formal security protection, a reflection of Sweden's broader cultural and political tradition of relatively accessible, unguarded political leadership that stood in genuine, stark contrast to the security protocols surrounding most comparable Western political leaders during the same period. On the evening of February 28, 1986, Palme and his wife Lisbeth left a Stockholm movie theatre following an evening screening, walking home together without any security escort. A routine, unremarkable evening activity entirely consistent with Palme's established personal habits when, at approximately 11:21 p.m., as the couple walked along a central Stockholm street, a lone gunman approached from behind and fired 2 shots, one striking Palme fatally and a second grazing his wife, before immediately fleeing the scene on foot into the surrounding dark streets. The subsequent police investigation, which would ultimately become one of the largest, most extensive criminal investigations in Swedish history, faced genuine, significant challenges from its earliest hours, including documented substantial confusion and organizational failures during the immediate response, with responding officers reportedly lacking clear coordination regarding the specific investigative priorities and evidence preservation procedures a case of this magnitude and sensitivity would typically demand. Procedural shortcomings that Swedish law enforcement's own subsequent internal reviews have acknowledged likely compromised the investigation's early evidentiary foundation in ways that proved difficult or impossible to fully recover from in the following years. Swedish investigators pursued numerous suspects and theories over the following decades, reflecting the genuinely wide range of political controversies and potential enemies Palme's outspoken international positions had generated throughout his career. Theories investigated with genuine, sustained seriousness over the years included potential involvement by South African intelligence services, motivated by Palme's vocal, sustained opposition to apartheid, Kurdish separatist groups, connected to specific domestic political tensions within Sweden during the period, and various organized crime connections, along with a genuinely significant sustained focus on a specific Swedish citizen named Pettersson, a man with a documented history of violent crime and substance abuse issues, who was formally charged and, in 1989, actually convicted of Palme's murder by a Swedish district court, based substantially on eyewitness identification, including from Lisbeth Palme herself, before this conviction was subsequently overturned on appeal, with Sweden's higher court determining the evidentiary basis, particularly regarding witness identification reliability, was insufficient to sustain the conviction beyond reasonable doubt. The case remained formally open and under active, if increasingly limited, investigation for decades following Pettersson's overturned conviction, with Swedish prosecutors periodically revisiting available evidence using increasingly advanced forensic techniques unavailable during the original 1986 investigation, without ever producing sufficient new evidence to support an alternative formal prosecution until June of 2020, when Swedish prosecutors formally announced they were closing the investigation entirely, publicly identifying a specific deceased individual, a graphic designer named Stig Engström, who had briefly been considered a minor witness during the original 1986 investigation, before later becoming a more seriously considered suspect through subsequent investigative work, as the person prosecutors believed had most likely committed the murder, while explicitly acknowledging that, since Engström had died in 2000, no formal criminal prosecution or trial could ever actually occur to definitively legally establish his guilt. This 2020 announcement, while providing Swedish authorities' own formal official conclusion regarding the case's most likely explanation, has not achieved universal acceptance among independent researchers, journalists and criminologists who have studied the case extensively over the decades, with several prominent researchers publicly expressing significant, genuine skepticism regarding the specific evidentiary basis prosecutors cited for identifying Engström specifically, meaning the case, despite its formal administrative closure, remains genuinely, actively disputed regarding whether the actual killer's identity has truly, definitively been established, or whether Swedish authorities essentially chose to formally conclude one of history's most prominent unsolved investigations without achieving the kind of conclusive, universally accepted resolution. The case's decades of sustained public and investigative attention might otherwise have suggested was achievable. What makes Palme's assassination endure as one of history's most significant unresolved political killings isn't simply the shocking, genuinely unusual circumstance of a sitting prime minister being murdered while walking essentially unguarded through his own capital city's streets. Remarkable as that specific vulnerability genuinely remains by the standards of comparable Western political leadership security during the same era. But the case's extraordinary duration and scale, one of history's largest sustained criminal investigations, spanning over 3 decades, ultimately concluding not with a definitively proven, universally accepted resolution, but with a formal administrative closure identifying a deceased suspect whose actual guilt remains genuinely, seriously disputed, even among researchers who have studied the case as closely as Swedish authorities themselves. If stories like this, where even one of history's largest criminal investigations couldn't produce an answer everyone actually agrees on, are exactly what you come here for, subscribe to The Grave Details, because history holds more stories like this than most people will ever know.